The night of the blood moon was supposed to be the most sacred night of Alpha King Kellen Ashford's life. For 5 years he had ruled the Blackthorn pack alone, carrying the weight of his parents' murder on his shoulders, hunting the rogue wolves responsible with a patience that had turned his heart to stone. Tonight, the moon would finally show him the one person who could soften that stone again. Tonight, his true mate would be revealed. The great hall of the Blackthorn Manor was filled with candlelight and the low hum of hundreds of wolves waiting for the ceremony to begin. Kellen stood at the center of it all, tall and unreadable, his eyes moving over the crowd without really seeing anyone. He was tired of pretending to care about a ritual that had never worked in his favor before. Near the back of the hall, half hidden behind a pillar, stood Seraphina Wren. She was the daughter of the pack healer, a quiet young woman who had spent her whole life fixing broken bones and stitched wounds instead of attending balls and ceremonies. She was not supposed to be here at all, but she had come anyway, because some small foolish part of her still hoped that when the moon rose, Kellen would look at her the way he used to look at her when they were children, before duty and grief had built a wall around him. She had loved him quietly for years. She had never told him. She never planned to. At the front doors, a very different woman arrived. Ivy Calloway stepped out of a black car in a gown so white it seemed to glow, flanked by guards from her father's territory. She was the daughter of a rival Alpha, sent to Blackthorn under the guise of goodwill, though everyone who looked closely could see the calculation behind her polished smile. Her father wanted an alliance, Ivy wanted power, and she had convinced herself that if the moon did not choose her naturally, she would simply make sure it looked like it had. The music began. The crowd quieted, and then, without warning, the doors at the far end of the hall burst open. Smoke poured in first, thick and black, followed by the snarls of wolves that did not belong to Blackthorn. Rogues. They moved through the crowd like shadows, cutting a path of panic through the ceremony. Guards shifted and fought back, but the surprise gave the attackers an advantage no one had prepared for. In the chaos, Kellen felt something he had never felt before. A pull, deep in his chest, sharp and undeniable, dragging his attention toward the center of the fighting. His wolf howled inside him, desperate to follow that pull, certain it was leading him straight to his mate. He saw a woman in white, being dragged by 2 guards toward the exit, surrounded by rogues trying to reach her. Without thinking, he moved. He fought through smoke and claws and blood, cutting down anyone who stood between him and that woman in white, until he finally reached her and pulled her against his chest, shielding her with his own body. It was Ivy. The pull in his chest was still there, confusing and unclear in the middle of the fighting, and in his exhaustion and adrenaline, Kellen mistook it for confirmation. He believed, with everything in him, that the moon had led him to her. In front of the surviving pack, breathless and covered in ash, he pressed his claim mark against her skin. The pack roared its approval, even as the wounded were carried away and the fires were put out. No one noticed that Seraphina Wren was missing. She had been near the back when the attack began, and in the panic, 2 rogues had grabbed her, mistaking her plain healer's dress for the uniform of a servant, someone with no value and no one to miss her. They dragged her out through a side door, while the entire hall's attention was fixed on the bride in white. By the time the fighting ended, Seraphina was gone, and no alarm was raised for her at all. She woke hours later in a cold stone cell, her wrists bound, her body aching from wounds she had not had time to heal. Her wolf whimpered inside her, too weak from blood loss to shift, too weak even to fight back when the rogues came to question her about Blackthorn's defenses. She said nothing, she had nothing to give them, and even if she had, she would rather have stayed silent forever than betray the pack that had raised her, even a pack that had not yet noticed she was missing. Back at the manor, the mating rites continued. Kellen sat beside Ivy through the formal blessing, accepting congratulations he barely heard, his mind clouded by something he could not name. There was a hollow ache building behind his ribs, small at first, then growing heavier with every hour that passed. Every wolf knew what that ache meant. It was the sign of a true mate in pain, calling out through the bond even when they could not speak. He told himself it would pass. He told himself the moon did not lie. Ivy knew better. She had felt Kellen's mark settle over her skin without the warmth that was supposed to come with a real bond, and she understood immediately that something had gone wrong. She was not his true mate, but she had come too far, and her father's alliance depended too much on this match for her to admit the truth now. She found the pack's seer, an old wolf named Mira, who could sense bonds clearer than anyone else in Blackthorn, and she paid her, quietly and carefully, to say nothing about what she surely already suspected. Days passed. Kellen grew paler, quieter, the ache in his chest turning into something closer to grief. He stopped sleeping. When he did sleep, he dreamed of a woman's voice calling his name from somewhere dark and far away, a voice he almost recognized but could not place. His beta, Rourke, was the first to notice something else was wrong. Rourke had grown up alongside Kellen and Serafina both, and it was strange to him, stranger the longer he thought about it, that he had not seen Serafina since the night of the attack. He asked the healers. No one had seen her. He asked the trackers who were supposed to search the grounds after any incident, and their reports came back empty, clean, and oddly rushed. Rourke was not a wolf who trusted things that looked too clean. He began asking quiet questions, the kind that did not draw attention. He learned that 2 of the senior trackers had received unusual payments the same week Serafina disappeared. He learned that Ivy had visited the trackers' quarters personally, more than once, always alone. Piece by piece, a picture began to form that he did not want to believe, but could no longer ignore. He brought what he had to Kellen, late one night, when the Alpha King was standing alone on the balcony outside his study, staring out at the dark tree line as if he expected someone to walk out of it. "There's something you need to know," Rourke said. "About Serafina." Kellen turned sharply. He had not said her name aloud in days, had tried not to think it, and yet hearing it now felt like a key turning in a lock he had not known was closed. Rourke told him everything. The missing tracker reports, the payments, Ivy's private conversations with Mira the seer, and as he spoke, the ache in Kellen's chest twisted into something sharp and unbearable, because suddenly he understood. The pull he had felt during the attack had not been leading him to Ivy at all. It had been leading him past her, towards someone else entirely, someone who had been taken while everyone's eyes were fixed on the bride in white. He found Ivy in her chambers within the hour. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. He simply looked at her with an expression so cold that she felt any hope of hiding the truth shatter completely, and she finally admitted what she had done. She told him where the rogues who attacked the ceremony usually retreated to, the stronghold her father's spies had once mapped out for their own purposes. It was the only piece of honesty she had left to offer him. Kellen did not wait for morning. He gathered Rourke and a small strike team of his most trusted fighters, and together they rode out into the night, following the trail toward the rogue stronghold hidden deep in the northern hills. The ache in his chest had turned into something close to panic now, a pressure that made it hard to breathe, because he understood that every hour Serafina had been missing was an hour she had likely spent in pain, alone, with no one coming for her. They reached the stronghold just before dawn. The fighting was fast and brutal, the element of surprise working in their favor this time. Kellen cut through the rogue guards with a fury he had never felt in battle before, driven by something far stronger than duty. When he finally broke through the door of the lowest cell, the sight that met him nearly brought him to his knees. Serafina lay curled against the stone floor, her wrists raw from the ropes that had bound her, her face pale from days without proper food or healing. But when she heard the door open, she lifted her head, and even bruised and broken, her eyes still held a spark of defiance, the same quiet strength he remembered from when they were children, and she used to patch up his scraped knees, without ever asking for thanks. "Kellen," she whispered, as if she could not quite believe he was real. The moment their eyes met, the bond that had been aching and searching inside him for days, finally roared fully to life, warm and undeniable, and utterly unmistakable. He crossed the small cell in 2 steps and knelt beside her, gathering her carefully into his arms, as if she might break, though she had already proven she was far stronger than that. "I'm here," he said, his voice rough with everything he had not let himself feel until now. "I'm so sorry it took me this long." She managed a small, tired smile. "You came," she said simply. "That's all that matters." He carried her out of that stronghold himself, refusing to let anyone else take the weight of her, cradling her against his chest, as if he could somehow undo the days she had spent forgotten. Rourke rode ahead to send word to the healers back home, and by the time they reached Blackthorn Manor, everything was ready for her. Her recovery was not quick. The wounds on her body healed faster than the ones the days of fear had left behind, but Kellen never left her side longer than necessary. He sat with her through the long nights when sleep would not come easily, and slowly, the wall he had built around his heart after his parents' deaths began, piece by piece, to come down. When Serafina was finally strong enough to stand on her own, Kellen called the entire pack together in the Great Hall, the same hall where the blood moon ceremony had gone so terribly wrong. He told them the truth, every part of it, without softening any of it for Ivy's sake. He told them how the moon had never chosen Ivy at all, how he had been misled in the chaos of that night, and how the true bond had been waiting the entire time for a woman the pack had almost let slip through its fingers. Ivy's father's alliance ended that same night. There were no threats needed, no further punishment demanded. The truth alone was enough to unravel everything Ivy had tried so carefully to build, and she left Blackthorn territory before the sun rose again, her ambitions in ruins. Serafina stood at the center of the hall, still healing, still a little unsteady on her feet, but no longer hidden behind any pillar, no longer someone the pack could overlook. Kellen took her hand in front of everyone and spoke the claim words properly this time, the way they were always meant to be spoken, with the whole truth behind them, instead of confusion and rush. The bond settled over her like warm sunlight, and this time, there was no hollow ache anywhere in either of their hearts. In the weeks that followed, Serafina was formally named Luna of Blackthorn, not because of her bloodline or her family's rank, but because fate itself had chosen her, and Kellen had finally learned to trust that choice completely. The pack that had once overlooked her now looked to her with respect, watching the quiet healer's daughter grow into a leader steady enough to stand beside their king. On the night of their true bonding ceremony, held under a calm and gentle moon instead of one shadowed by smoke and chaos, Kellen looked down at Serafina and made her a quiet promise, one meant only for her ears. "I will never again fail to see what was right in front of me," he said. And this time, when the moon rose fully above them, there was no mistake left to make. There was only the two of them, finally found, finally whole, and finally home.